So this is pretty informal, nothing too crazy, and we'll just get into what you do and the beautifulness of yoga tune-up, breathing,
and we've listened to everything you've put out over the years, and we went to the one you did it at On It in Austin, Texas.
You remember we filmed it?
Well, I remember Smitty, but I don't remember you.
Yep, I was one of the participants. Yep.
He was the guy that kept trying to take his clothes off, his shirts and his shoes.
I thought you meant pants too.
So it's always better with skin.
Yes.
Interacting with the balls. So I was cheering you on, and you got to lead by example. It's
exactly.
Good.
But just to give you an idea of the Becoming Ronin audience, where I was going with that is you're equipped to talk to these people, because I've listened to a lot of stuff you put out, and that's actually one of the original points that I wanted to bring up, was that you are someone that gives permission to the everyday lifter and someone that's not a practitioner to be able to work on themselves. And I love that about you. I love that you and Kelly Surratt have kind of brought the practitioner feel of rehab to the lifter. And I'm a car guy on YouTube. There's this guy, Chris Fix, who has a YouTube channel with millions of subscribers. And all he did was basically small how-to videos on how to work on your own car. And I felt like that general maintenance was so needed for everyday people. And similarly, you're kind of like the Chris Fix to the fitness industry, where you just started putting out things that people were already hungry for. Mm-hmm. And we appreciated that. Smitty's on that same vein. But one of my first questions is just, everyone has kind of adopted fitness in their own lives. How do we end up here where everyone is so injured from day to day? We have the CrossFit athletes, we have the power lifters, we have the bodybuilders, we have the jiu-jitsu athletes. And on one hand, you have this hunger for it. On another hand, you have a complete negligence of your own maintenance from day to day. What, in your opinion, has led to the massive negligence in the industry of how we got here?
I think that the carrot has always been aesthetics. I think in the US, I think that aesthetics has been the primary drive. And when we're working on an outside in goal, we really risk bypassing our senses, because we're going for something outside of ourselves, or some look, or some hypertrophy, or some rippage of the six pack. So I think that would be the most general answer that I would have, that, weight loss and looks are a bigger sell than feel your way through a centrated joint and get a sense of increasing the tension through a range of motion. It's seems a little bit more boring than
that's a good point.
Hot. I want to be thin. I want to be shredded. I want to be pumped. So I guess that would be, the simplistic view of it.
Yeah, that's a great answer. I think that we were just talking, I don't remember who we were interviewing, but we were talking about that exact thing, and how everyone that says why they are participating in fitness is really lying to you. Like deep down, it's like they want to look like Arnold, or they want to be a model, like, that old subconscious driver. But so how did you end up in this space, and how did you identify that was a need? Was that purposeful? Did you see that this was all sort of coming to a head and you wanted to get ahead of it? Or what's your own personal take on that?
No, I'm really a process-based learner, and I don't think I ever had, there was never any goal for me. There still isn't a goal. I'm just so interested in learning. And I came to the fitness industry out of a mental health need. So when I was a tween, I was very overweight as a kid. So going back to aesthetics, I was teased and I was bullied. I had the really thick glasses. I was a nerd. And by 6th grade, I was really short too. I was 4'9", and I was just about just right around 100 pounds. So I was a big, I was a grape. I was a grape child with the big, thick glasses. And my family teased me. I never got picked in sports. It's just, that it was horrible. I played with my dogs, and we lived off the grid in Santa Fe, New Mexico. We lived in a solar home. I mean, talk about weird upon weird. So we lived in this solar home off the grid, and we didn't have TV because it was so far out of town. And my parents, they actually got a satellite dish so we could have TV, but really we watched a lot of videos. And one day my mom brought home it was Betamax. I'm a child of the 70s. Jane Fonda workout and the Raquel Welch yoga video, because she wanted to get in shape. And so I was like, okay, well, I'll do this with you. And I just remember going through those videos and just being tossed. It was so difficult. And I was so out of breath and so out of touch. But something lit me up when I did these videos. Something turned on for me about my body, about getting in my body. And I knew that these could lead to weight loss, right? Because I'm not immune to the culture I'm growing up in. There's weight loss culture is everywhere. And sure enough, I started to do those videos and I got better and better. My mother dropped off at about 2 weeks. She was non-compliant, non-adherent, but I became obsessed with them. And I became obsessed with them in the most absolutely unhealthy way. I couldn't function if I didn't do them. And so I did these videos every day compulsively. I stopped eating the volume of food that I was, and I became anorexic. So I went from being overweight to being an exercise abuser, and lost a lot of weight, and nobody said anything. I was able to hide a lot of because I could see I was getting skeletal. I would wear really baggy clothes. That was in. And somehow I managed to migrate my way out of the anorexia without support, like without mental health support, which is what I needed. I was checking out books from the library on anorexia. I didn't know why. I didn't really know what all the forces were that were happening to me, but it was really a cry for help. But it ended up converting to a different eating disorder. I became bulimic. I started binging and purging. And you can't leave your body behind, nor can you leave food behind. And so ultimately I had to find solutions through my body in order to help my mental health, because I was using my body as a tool to control myself. But ultimately I had to figure out how to like myself. I had to figure out how to feel my own emotions. And it was through the massage approaches, the self-massage approaches that are, all over my work, that I really was able to find my way through, and then share that with so many different communities. So it's like, yeah, the weightlifting community really likes my work. Why? I think I talk in a very sensible way. And I'm also using, the language of anatomy and not the language of woo to support people.
Yeah. So that's really interesting, because I've always kind of wondered how, I guess unless you look like Donnie Thompson, a lot of these guys aren't going to look like, they're not going to look to you for advice on performance with bodybuilding, powerlifting. And obviously you might be completely like the image of the opposite of Donnie Thompson. So I've always wondered, just how you crack the code on the meathead industry sort of thing. But that makes sense, because there's a lot of parallels between eating disorders and bigorexia and body dysmorphia. And it's funny because as healthy as people in the industry are, for every one person that gets into it for health, there's probably 10 that get into it for some disorder or some body image issues. So you saying that actually made me realize why we're kind of all the same in that way.
Yeah. And I especially I love meeting men who have confronted their own body dysmorphia, because I think you guys as men probably see it a lot in your space, but it really is this hidden pain that so many men and women obviously carry around. And I think because I've, healed, I've done my work, and I'm not afraid to talk about it. I'm not afraid to talk about how dark it was and what that self-hatred, how that manifests. But it's like, I think I've created a really safe space for people to be able to be willing to accept themselves, all of themselves, even the dark parts, and know that they're still a whole person, even with these the dark parts of themselves. So I really, really am able to connect with that suffering and not see it as a bad thing.
Now, with your, I connect a lot with your story because I have 3 daughters, right? So I've navigated 3 teenage girls growing up, and I was just wondering, like, looking back, you're saying you've done the work and you've really become self-aware. Thinking back, like, what advice now, knowing what you know, and in the space that you're in right now, and the maturity and reflection, like, looking back, what do you think you would tell your younger self, when they first maybe got the Jane Fonda videos?
Wow, every time this question gets asked of me, I really don't know what I'm going to say, because people do ask, well, what would you tell that little girl? How would you console her? How would you build her up? I think fundamentally, I wasn't allowed to really feel my own anger. I wasn't allowed to feel my own feelings. No matter what I expressed to the adults in my life, it just got pummeled. It just was disavowed. It was denied. And so I think the ability to just express unbounded expression of rage, of disappointment, of disenchantment, of disillusionment, and to let that little girl know that it's really important to keep those feelings going, right? To not squelch them. So I think a lot of because I just turned that against myself, and punished myself with food or with my fists or with exercise or with yoga. I mean, I used it as a weapon against myself, because I didn't really know, I didn't have any other outlet.
Yeah.
So how does the tune-up model play into that? How is that different? A lot of people get into the industry and they immediately turn to the most destructive forms of fitness, and we talk about it a lot, but I run training studios, and a lot of the times people will use training as a punishment, whether it's like an emotional outlet and they're full of angst, or they ate poorly and they went out and drank on the weekend, so they know they need to punish themselves by offsetting the caloric intake, things like that. So I like what your
ethos.
Your ethos is, because Smitty and I both have gone through your hands-on workshop, and I can see the need, just even in our own training studio, and I carry your products in our gym, and we always yeah, absolutely. And we'll get into some of that as well, but I just want to know what your take is on the tune-up ethos.
Yeah. So Tune Up Fitness is my company, and I've built different formats within that, including Yoga Tune Up, the Role Model, and now Body by Breath, also something called Treat While You Train, different ways of packaging concepts. So let me reduce things to one of the biggest themes that has always compelled me, which is to help people find and heal their body blind spots. So body blind spots are areas of overuse, underuse, misuse, abuse, or body confusion. The areas of our body that we don't really sense well. And that, to me, has always been the most interesting thing about any learner, about any fitness person or yoga person, is where are those parts of self that they have genuine neurological confusion on, whether it's gross sensing, like proprioception, knowing where your limbs are in space, in movement or stillness, or whether it's subtle sensing, interoception, your ability to listen to yourself physiologically, to hear the signals that your organs are giving you, to hear and pick up the urges of hunger, of satiation, of appetite, of muscle burn, of heat, of cool, of lust, of joy. So there are these fields of feelings that are either present for people or they're absent for people, but they are trainable and they are coachable. And that's what I harness in all of my modalities, all of the things that I use, the therapy balls, the positional exercises, the breath-based exercises, and the mindset work that goes along with it, so that you can amplify this inner experience. Again, so on the flip side, we started off this conversation. What do I think is the biggest problem? Well, I think aesthetics and weight loss driven messaging is really problematic. So my whole thing is let's get you inside and get you familiar with the textures of your tension, with the qualities of tension, with appropriate tension, with inappropriate tension. What are all of these feels? My body thinks and feels is a huge theme of Body by Breath. My body thinks and feels. Well, what does that mean? And then how do I illuminate that so that I can make better choices about my position? I can make better choices about my next breath. I can make better choices about how I'm relating with my business partner or my children. So there are so many ramifications beyond just the training space. And there's a lot of this is research based, and I illuminate that also in the pages of the Body by Breath in particular, because that's the newer book. But this is the stuff that really drives my programming. I want to help my people to discover what is undercover. And that is a process of remembering your body.
Because I love the blind spot thing.
Us. It's been taken away from us by outside forces, doctors or society that says you should be this. This is, you have a doctor for your teeth, you have a doctor for your bones, you have a doctor for your blood. It's like, okay, well, but what am I feeling?
Yeah, we do a lot of post rehab in our facilities, and we will have referrals from physical therapists and chiropractors and you name it. And a lot of times they come in with their list of exercises, their glute bridges, their band pull aparts, things like that. And to me, it seems to be completely missing the point of corrective exercise. And I remember when we were on it in your workshop, you were talking about sensory inputs and kind of feeling certain body parts. And I never really thought about massage as a way to increase the neural connectivity to a specific area and the muscle re-education that can come from that. What are some other myths, or maybe just as a whole, what are some of the biggest misconceptions about SMR, some of your work?
Well, let's see. Let me just pull out like
everything.
pages of books here. Well, I guess, okay. Where do I start? So yeah, I'm involved in the fascia research community, and I wrote a chapter. Gosh, it got published December 2020. We're in a second edition writing right now, but the book is called Fascia Function and Medical Applications, and it's a medical textbook with different themes from the fascia research space. And my chapter is on self-myofascial release. And I learned a lot when I did the research review for that chapter. I was afraid. One of the things I was afraid of was when I was approached to write it, I said to the editor, I was like, I'm an entrepreneur. Are you sure you want me to do this? I have a little bit of a conflict of interest here because I'm, of a bias. And they're like, just put aside your bias and do your work. And I was like, okay. Which was an interesting thing because, what if I discovered in doing the research that all of the extrapolated claims that I'd made up to that point were all BS. But I'm a student of this work. just like my students are students of mine. I'm a student of this work, and I don't want to be making false claims. I don't want to be perpetuating myths, and I want to learn what I don't know. Had I read all the research? No, I didn't. I hadn't read all the research up to that point, and then I did. So, and by the way, we're in the second edition right now, so I'm caught up in reading all the papers that have been printed in the last 3.5 years, which is also really interesting stuff to consider. But okay, so first of all, I think a lot of people may not understand fascia as a tissue or fascia as a system, as a whole. And there has been a lot of dismissive around connective tissue, which I really don't understand, because it's like ever present and all living creatures. So why it's just like, what if nobody thought that the nervous system was important and it just got shit on all the time? Like, so fascial tissues are the tissues that are suspending and knitting together every cell of your body, right? From cell to skin, from foot to face, and everything in between. The only thing that it's not holding things together is your brain. It doesn't hold your brain cells together, but it's everywhere else.
Yeah, it's probably pretty important then.
Seems like it might be important.
Right.
And I think that the, like my friend Tom Myers, who I've partnered with many times, we have a program together called Rolling Along the Anatomy Trains. Tom's Anatomy Trains model has become really the basis of functional training. When you look at these continuities or whole body movements, much of it is wrapped around these tensional patterns that are his anatomy trains. And many of them have held up in lab tests. I think a couple of them haven't, but I think 12 out of 14 is pretty good. It's a pretty good runway. But these tensional, these fascial trains, as Tom describes, they aren't just these inner elastobands that we're walking around with. Our fascial tissues are fluid rich, and they are cell rich, and they are nerve rich. This is a living system in your body. And so I think one of the misconceptions is that people just think that, oh, it's just this elasticy thing in me that allows me to, to elongate or generate force or have recoil or what have you. But your fascia is turning over, just like your muscle cells are turning over. Mm-hmm. Your fascia is actually the site of where you have delayed onset muscle soreness. Your delayed onset is not in the muscle. It's the inflammatory cytokines stimulating the sensory nerve endings in your fascia. So when we're feeling this miserable agony in our muscles after a workout, 2 days after a workout, it's the adaptation of the fascial tissues that is creating this annoying pain. So I think that the role of fascia is much more complex and interesting than when most people would even just have time to be interested in.
Right.
So when you say, well, what are the myths? I mean, the myths of self-massage, self-myofascial release are abundant, and I'm happy to describe lots of the great benefits of self.
Well, I guess we're not to jump in front of you, but the thought that I had is when physical therapists are sending me people and they have a list of 10 exercises, you talking about the connectivity to the neural network that is your fascia is a missing link in the rehab world. And I think it's the intention behind the movement and the awareness and the proprioception and turning on some of these mechanoreceptors through some sort of input. And in doing that, I think it's two-sided. I think in one, people do become more body aware. And secondly, I think that there's a lot of inhibition going on whenever there's maybe a decentrated joint or a stiff pain. Yeah, pain. There's more inhibition that's going on subconsciously than that person's aware of. And you talking about the input that you're achieving with some of the tune-up balls made me think about the lack of awareness of that within the physical therapy community. Just by them sending me people with a list of exercises. I mean, any good coach, trainer will know that you can't just put someone on their back and do sets of 10 glute bridges and their back pain goes away. There's something else, and that something that transcends that just list of exercises is kind of what you're on the forefront of discovering whether or not the science supports it, I feel like there are always practitioners that are years ahead of the literature, and sometimes it just takes the literature some time to catch up. So I guess that's where my question was going with that.
Yeah. So you're in, within your there's abundant sensory nerve endings within your fascial tissues. You've got Ruffini endings that are abundant in the superficial fascial layer. That superficial fascial layer is embedded within your adipose tissue. And so we can affect these sensory neurons through pressure and through shear, like just doing things that create a traction from skin at a horizontal vector. So like you push in and then you shift the tissue. That's one of the ways to stimulate these Ruffini endings.
So that's why you would do that stuff with like on the skin, right? That's why you were saying
creating twisting and ringing and shearing. Plow. We have this technique called ball plow. So different techniques that would try to create shifts in the fatty layer, but that fatty layer, it has this superficial fascia membrane embedded. Then the superficial fascia, it links into the deep fascia layer surrounding a given muscle. But within different locations within your muscles or your tendons, we also have Pacini corpuscles, we have muscle spindle, we have Golgi tendon organs. These little sensory nerve endings, they're all encased in fascia. Mm-hmm. So and the tensional pulls on these different corpuscles or these different capsules, this is what's that yanking is happening upon the fascial tissues, and then the nerve endings are sensing those pulls or those tensions or those compressions, and then that's going back to to the spinal cord, and maybe it's making it up to the brain, or maybe it doesn't need to, maybe it's a shorter feedback loop. But the sensory inputs, what's been shown with the rolling, ends up creating better motor firing in the same pathway. And so when we light ourselves up proprioceptively via the friction of rolling or the pressure of rolling, depending on the application that we're doing, we get more precise contractions and we get stronger contractions. The rolling increases force production. Okay, so that's on a neural aspect. But when you look at the restrictions in fascial tissue because of lack of use or injury or a lack of awareness that one could move an area, the muscle cells each muscle cell lives in an encasement of fascia called endomysium. Just like when you open up an orange, you see the finest filament of the orange. Each cell of juice is surrounded by this cellulose structure, right? The analogy is almost exact with muscle cell. And so we have this fascial envelope around every muscle cell. And these muscle cells are then bonded together in groupings called a fascicle, or also called a fascicle, if you will. And that's surrounded by even more fascia. And those fascicles, they need to be able to glide next to each other and amongst each other, whatever the motor neuron is telling a variety of fascicles to do in any given movement. And if they don't glide well together, then they're going to stick, because if the contractions aren't occurring because maybe there's been an injury or a wound or there's weakness, the fascial tissues within the muscle itself are going to agglomerate and stick to one another. And that's going to prevent it's going to prevent contractions, it's going to prevent good contractions, but it can eventually end up leading to pain and dysfunction, at the joint above or below it, or whatever it's governing, whatever movement that muscle is governing.
Right.
That stickiness, that stiffness starts to relay pain signals. It starts to relay, poor movement patterns. Something has to be done about that. It's not just that lifting a weight is going to cure that or take care of that. We probably have to use some type of friction-based massage, whether it's somebody else getting in there with their thumb and doing things, or their elbow, or whether it's you using a ball to try to induce glide, to reintroduce glide to tissues that have become stuck and stiff in and amongst themselves. So we can rehabilitate very local areas within a given tissue to improve the glide. That's going to improve the contraction. And in the meantime, the deep touch improves this sensory motor loop as well. So there's so many good benefits to one doing some self-myofascial release, either in local places or even grander planes where there's lack of glide in and amongst tissues. And yeah, there's lots of research on this. I'm happy to point you to my chapter, which has
I'll definitely look into it.
So that's in the role model, right? More specifically.
No, so the role model, interestingly enough, when I wrote the role model, there was so little available research. A lot of my claims in that book I had extrapolated from massage. And luckily, they are the fascia research that is in that book, it still holds up. So what's in that book holds up, the application holds up, but I'm really happy that now, 12 years later, there's evidence that supports the claims that I made back then. And those are broadly stated in Body by Breath, as well as that chapter that I mentioned.
Well, I feel super old because I literally remember the role model coming out and getting that in the mail. I can't believe it's been 12 years, but I did want to.
It's 10 years old. So, you close your writing a good year, almost a year before the book goes to become published, right? So I think the book was published November 2014. So the book is now 10 years old. It's a 10-year-old book.
Wow. Well, Obi's such a good interviewer. I'm sitting here just thinking about.
I'll dominate the conversation. I have so many questions, so you got to jump in here.
So the question I had, I just want to tell you kind of what we were doing with our certification. We have a CPPS certification, but we've talked about fascia since 2012 as well. And I've been so interested in it just because it was so fascinating.
We had to actually cut half of Smitty's part out because every cert we would go to, he would add something more about breathing and fascia.
Right.
And it turned into all of day one was breathing and fascia. And people were like glazed over by 3 hours.
Because the way...
Talk to my people. That's all they want to hear about, Smitty.
Yeah, Smitty would love that.
The first day, like Obi said, like I would lecture literally for maybe 4 or 5 hours just on breathing and fascia or whatever. But I was looking into the Fascial Congress way back then, and I got into Robert Schlepp's fascial plasticity. The two studies. And from that, we started talking about at the certification where fascia, or the fascial fabric, if you will, responds to both pressure and movement and breathing. And the thing that I wanted you to just kind of add a little bit in, just because of your application, was there's a difference between pressure into the fascia with a lacrosse ball versus pressure and shearing with a yoga tune-up ball. And I hope you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So just like when you're walking on different surfaces, you have these ground reaction forces that end up putting pressure into your joints, into your whole body, right? Like running on asphalt is different than running on a spongy gym floor, is different than running in the woods, is different than running on sand, is different than running on concrete. Out of those different surfaces, the one I would least want to run on is concrete, because there is no elasticity in concrete. It is just so hard. So all of the stresses end up going right back into your body, and you get really jangled, really compressed. Ideally, you have a surface that actually returns the serve, right? That actually has some yield, and then it bounces back into you. So a lacrosse ball has no yield. A pliable ball, like a role model ball, yoga tune-up ball, the alpha ball, the plus ball, these are all springy rubber that compress when your body weight goes on them. A lacrosse ball only transfers continuous stress into the tissues, whereas a ball that has yield, like the role model balls, they can conform to your form. So we call massage tools stress transfer mediums. So they transfer stress into the tissues. And the harder an implement is, the more your body has to protect itself from the implement. So what a lot of people don't realize is that a lacrosse ball is made of the same hardness of material as a bowling ball. And I mean, the last time you rolled a bowling ball on your neck or your collarbones or your spine or your ribs, I mean, just think about it. Just even think about how
Does not
how
sound
that
fun.
yeah, exactly. So this is known in the textile space, this is known as durometer. Durometer is the amount of compressibility of a given object. So if I'm taking the durometer of Hubba Bubba, it's going to be pretty spongy. If I'm taking the durometer of a brick, not so spongy. So we want to find something that can meld with our body rather than kind of aggravate or irritate or create even more pain when the objective is to remove pain. And so in the literature, there is scant, unfortunately, in many of the self-myofascial release research, the majority of tools used are very hard. Foam rollers are actually very dense. Even though an individual foam cell is squishy, when they're all compacted together, this is a very hard object. Rolling sticks, also very hard. Many of the rolling implements that are out there made from very hard materials, and then maybe they're covered with some kind of spongy material, but the substrate deep underneath that is a very hard thing. So hardness is a factor that influences the muscle bracing response. So when an object, the hard object, goes into tissue, your brain naturally does not want to be poked by something hard. And so it sets up a bracing response, a tension response, a guarding, a shield to prevent the hard tool from moving towards the tissue target. And that's what you see at the gym. You see people with their eyes popped open, their teeth grinding together, holding their breath while they're rolling against their pain. They're on a hard object and they're basically just fighting their own tension rather than working with their tension or finding or adapting their position so that they can have that melding, molding quality. So the tools that I use are already super compressy, meaning they just don't ignite that same type of bracing response. Obviously, if somebody has a very low pain pressure threshold, or excuse me, is very, very sensitive to touch or sensitive to pressure, of course, that's going to set off the alarm bells. And we modify. How? Well, you lean against a wall. You can double up the tool, so it's not just one thing poking at you, but maybe you've got them in the peanut, right, in the tote. So there's many ways to work with people's pain pressure threshold. But for general population, and especially for bodies in pain, I would discourage people from using super hard objects, because what ends up happening is you just go into a sympathetic stress state to prevent the tool from entering your body. And that's happening on an unconscious level. And so best practice really is to be able to work with your stress state. How? Well, through breathing, using a tool that has a little bit more gush, a little bit more squish to it. And then also getting comfortable with not having to feel agony when you're rolling. It doesn't have to hurt to work. This isn't a pain and gain practice. This is a process of trying to awaken your sensitivity, not make you more insensitive, or again, position yourself as in a battle with your pain.
I was just gonna say, I guess some of the lessons have been lost in the past. How long ago did we go to her workshop? I was just thinking about my own, it's funny because it's the exact same thing that we run into with clients. You tell a client to get down on a foam roller and they've never done it before. And any trainer knows if you do that on their first session, they're probably never going to come back. And if they do it, they're like so tense. And it's like trying to use a Theracane to massage your own traps. Like you're using your muscles that you're trying to relax. And it's never really made sense to me. But as you're explaining it, it's kind of like getting a massage, like a good masseuse has a variety of pressure techniques.
Mm.
And if they just went around driving their thumb into every single muscle, you'd probably leave feeling worse.
Right.
So that's a great explanation.
So I did have, I'm going to put you on the spot because this is one of the biggest kind of selling points that most people talk about with foam rolling. And I know it's been debunked and, you know, we really don't know what's going on, but I'd really love to hear what you think is going on with after some type of soft tissue pressure is applied. The way I explain it is we're not breaking up scar tissue. We're not changing, you know, the length of the soft tissue, anything like that. We're just creating a temporary or transient like neural downregulation or resting tone of the soft tissue to allow for better movement moving forward in the, you know, I call it like a window of trainability, your potential for the next training session. So what is your go-to explanation about what's going on after some type of soft tissue is applied, soft tissue pressure?
Well, oh God.
Is this an hour response question?
Yeah, this is like, I have a 2-day course on this, on what is happening. So it's like so unfair, especially when the lead-in is loaded with other misconceptions and myths, and we need to like string out each one. But we don't have time to do all that.
Most simple response.
Get you to the role model course, both of you will be my guests. I will bombard you with so many cool facts and so much cool research, and you will just be like, oh my gosh, we are the coolest organisms ever. Okay, wait, I'm sweating now. I'm getting.
We'll be about to drop some knowledge.
Oh my God. I don't know where to start though. Okay. So you're one of the first things that your question makes me want to respond to is when we're rolling and creating this friction or pressure, we're creating a beneficial inflammation. So we're trying to attract the right type of healing response in that area, which is going to be some migration of maybe mast cells or neutrophils, a hopefully a tolerable cytokine remodeling in the area. We want to move out the gnarly stuff that is creating pain or perpetuating pain or keeping the fluid environment, let's use a simple word, toxic and sludgy, gluey. We're stimulating a cell response in there for the fibroblasts, which are the cells that tend and mend the fascial web, so they can either break down collagen or they can build collagen. So we're trying to create a signal for that remodeling to happen in there. We are creating, for sure, an analgesic effect. There is this transient analgesic effect, a downregulation of the sympathetic tone in that area, which will allow tissues that have been strummed or stroked to elongate. That's good news, especially for the stuff on the opposite side of the body. So if we take upper cross syndrome, for example, where you have a very short pecs, you have internally rotated shoulders, you have elongated upper traps, you have elongated infraspinatus. So once I'm able to create enough friction here, I use the therapy balls actually create stretch in those tissues. They create stretch in the fascial tissues. I now can actually relocate my joint, and I can now train the muscles that have been chronically lengthened by my habitual forward shoulder position. I can start to train them in a better position because they're not all roll out of whack, hedging forward all the time. So I can now optimize the length tension relationship around the joints that I'm trying to train or I'm trying to inform. So, and then what happens, hopefully overnight, your training has been good and those muscles start to get stronger and hold your shoulder overall in a better position. I mean, chances are overnight, your brain's gonna be like, wait a minute, I remember yesterday I remember last year, I want to be this vulture shaped person. But you just have to keep giving it that stimulus. And over time, that is the remodel. So, yes, we have this transient window to train. We have an analgesic effect. We have new remodeling within the fascial tissues, but then we need to train appropriately. So it isn't just roll out and hope for the best. You have to then use this new better movement to train best movement practices, best movement practice patterns over
That's
time.
fantastic. I did want to ask a follow-up question because I literally have 32 other questions just from what you just said. But that inflammatory response, you talked about the fascial remodeling. The first thing that came to mind was, I don't know how to word this without sounding too stupid, but since you're the expert, I'm just going to throw it out there and you can make sense of it. But is the remodeling, is there a balance of collagen versus elastin in that fascial remodeling that if it's more collagen, the response would be to stiffen up the soft tissue more just from that inflammatory response? Is that different?
Okay.
Am I making sense?
There are different types of collagen that are part of the stiffening response. So I could, if I could injure myself rolling, just like I could injure myself stretching, or I could injure myself overtraining. And then my collagen type, oh my gosh, help me out here, Jill. Brain, remember, I always get collagen type 1, 2, and 3 mixed up. And I don't have my cheat sheet here. But let's say
you can fool us.
Yeah, you can say anything and I would believe it.
Okay, very good. But we do have different stiffnesses within different. So you've got like about 16 different collagen types that these fibroblasts create. And so I don't want to perpetuate creating a scar type of collagen, right? I don't want to injure myself and end up having extra stiffness, inappropriate stiffness, because my cells are like, holy shit, I have got to batten down the hatches here, right? Because you've overdone it. You've created a really negative. So it's like, how much rolling is enough? What's the dose? Oh my gosh, did I overroll? Well, you overroll because it freaking hurts worse after you rolled something. And chances are the remodeling will create more stiffness because it's under threat. Okay, so wait, let me track back. Oh, this is an interesting question. Nobody's ever asked me before, and I don't know the answer to it. I don't know. I think the overall fascial net, I think you have like 98% collagen and 2% elastin, or maybe it's 97 and 3. And I don't know where your elastin in general is more abundant within that. Like, is it more? Do you have more elastin production in your face than in your butt? I don't know. We'd have to ask. Maybe we could ask that to Carla Stecco or Katarina Fede. Like, I just don't know that answer.
Well, the question kind of stems from, and I think you've answered it perfectly, but it kind of stems from the idea that Gen Pop, or the guys that we typically deal with, they train very hard. And that post-workout, you mentioned it, that stiffness is greater for them because they tend to just push really hard every single workout.
Right.
And it kind of mirrors or complements what you said earlier about how the soft tissue is plastic, or it takes a long amount of time to be consistent with the application of the pressure and the movement to really change you back, maybe to overcome that upper cross syndrome and the hard training. And one of the things that I talk about, I have another certification called Ageless Athlete, but I talk about how many times we just think this fitness thing is so healthy for our body, but if it's not balanced with the hard work with soft work, right, you're just running yourself into the ground, and the fitness that you relied on to help you become stronger, better movement in your real life is really making you stiff into Frankenstein, because you love to train, but this other stuff, this micro dosing of mobility and self-care that should complement that, especially more so as you get older, is not there to balance it out.
Yeah. And I think that's where the Body by Breath book walks in the door to really amplify resiliency, not just in your, sympathetic, parasympathetic, recovery, but also your tissue recovery, the elasticity, the ability to have range of motion, that you haven't locked yourself, you haven't sort of muscle bound or scar bound yourself by your training. So I don't know if there was a question. Was there a question?
Well, let's go.
I was wondering the same thing.
Well, let's
That's a
go.
good point.
No, there's no question. I was just saying that I love the information you're saying, just because it's so important to be. The harder you train, the harder you have to recover, and everything you're talking about is something that lifters who love to train, they forget this other aspect of training better and thinking about longevity. And you talked about how, your soft tissue quality really affects your joint position, and then that allows you to train better and all these different things. But let me throw a question out to you. I just had the table talk with Elite, and I did like a very quick little primer on box breathing, and you hit me on Instagram. You're like, let's go deeper. So body by breath, I want to know the if you wanted to summate it, or if you wanted to talk about like how important breath work is to longevity, but also, why is it so important, and how can people get started with it?
Oh my goodness. All right.
I know that's a huge question.
I don't remember what your post was, but I do remember saying like, all right, anyway, I'm glad people are talking about box breathing. I'm glad people, that's really hooked in. People understand, there can be 4 parts to a breath, and I can do different things at these different stages of breathing. I can do interesting things with my inhale and have it be a certain duration. I can suspend my inhalation for a certain duration that has effects. I can do fancy things during my exhalation that has effects. And then I can also have this vacation at the end of my exhale before inhale begins. That there are these 4 phases, and they are decorative. We can really decorate the span of a breath to do novel things to our body. So I wrote the book Body by Breath. And sometimes I'm like, oh gosh, if only the word breath weren't in the title, because I don't consider myself, I'm not a breath worker. Like, breath work has taken on its own tribalness as a identity in the greater fitness space. And where I come from, I've always used breathing as a tool for movement, for awareness, as a way to update or adjust state. I was originally trained as a singer. That's how I first came to know breathing. When I was a overweight kid, I still knew about the diaphragm because I was a singer. I wanted to be Annie on Broadway. So I wrote this book as a way to help people create a novel parasympathetic response in their body. Because breathing is not just a nose to lungs experience. Breathing is a body-wide experience, and every breath you take has a ripple effect to every corner of your body, not just because your cells need to breathe and exchange oxygen and CO2, but because of the pressure differential created by muscles like the respiratory diaphragm, only the coolest skeletal muscle you can possibly have, as well as the intercostals and the responsiveness of the soft tissues interconnected to the dynamism of breathing as a whole. Breathing is also so neurological. It's so brainiacness. It's like it takes us into, we start to study the breath. You have to be able to diversify the different zones of rule that breath influences. So the book tries to disassemble many of those things and introduce people to novel ways of enlarging their capacity to tolerate a parasympathetic response. In other words, enlarge their endurance for relaxation. Because what I do see, because I've been in the fitness industry for decades, is that the majority of people, certainly outside of the yoga space, not in the yoga space, but the majority of people outside of the yoga space They train, they upregulate, they crash. They go, 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 go. They burn out, they get injured, they're taken out. The injury takes them into parasympathetic dominant. Instead of them training their parasympathetic, the virtues of the parasympathetic nervous system so that they can build a better capacity for their own relaxation response, so that they can build their resilience at both ends of the spectrum, not burn out because they're just sympathetically overdriven, but so that they can also find interest in this other side, these other aspects of being. And I've taken like all the woo out of it, and I just present to you the physiology. I present to you the research, but I also present to you these novel ways of doing it. And that includes movements that are breathing movements, rolling, of course, because self-myofascial release is so effective. Move. So you have breathe, roll, move, and then another piece, which is called yoga nidra, also known as non-sleep deep rest. And that non-sleep deep rest term was coined by Andrew Huberman. And I just find that it's a really great reframe on that type of a practice. But that is a stillness practice. And stillness practices can ignite a lot of fear in many, many bodies. But really the emphasis in the book is this breathe, roll, move, and how when you combine these, you can really unlock your inner medicine chest and adjust state.
Yeah, I've recognized through the years of training people that it's almost like a personality where clients come in and they're like a hummingbird, and it's like a fast, weak pulse. Like they're always stuck in that sympathetic nervous system branch. And I can almost identify the type of person that it's going to be and what their performance outcomes will be. Whereas conversely, I'll have, these college athletes come in that are hockey players, and it's almost like they just woke up. It's like 3 p.m. It's like they're so low until they need to express force, and they could jump through the roof and deadlift 600 pounds and sprint. And it's like we saw Paul Gagny at the Swiss. I think it was the last time we went, and he was talking about how he trains a lot of high level athletes. And he was saying that's what he found too, is parasympathetic nervous system domination is almost a necessity to be a top level athlete, because you can't be high strung all the time. You have to be like a lion taking a nap under the tree, and then you wake up and you go find your prey. So I thought that was an interesting point. And I'm learning that the hardest part of this podcast interview is that we're going to leave a lot of questions in the tank here, because I just looked down, it's already at an hour.
I have like 12 other questions.
Yeah, we didn't tell you this is a 6-hour interview. So
because it's the three of us, it's almost like a little bit of an intro into aspects of both books, of sort of both of the areas that I cover. I mean, Body by Breath, I have a 3-day course on it. We just finished an immersion. I have it online. I do it in person, but I mean, to talk to these people, from all over the world, and they're like, I slept 9 hours last night, or I slept 6 hours. I haven't slept 6 hours uninterrupted in 5 years, right? So you see all the effects of doing deep parasympathetic practice. You're like, oh, I had a great bowel movement this morning, or all of a sudden I'm having vivid dreams, or it was a terrible last 24 hours. We have many family members under duress right now, but I was really able to handle it all. So you see the cognitive effects, you see improved decision-making, you see sleep effects, the ability to have a quieter bowel, all of these things. So there's so many, benefits to steeping oneself in parasympathetic practices, and I did this because this is what I needed for my own regulation, because I'm so sympathetically attuned, as you can tell, with a really nice, warm, soft landing.
Wow.
So I did, just as a helpful guide for people listening, I want to just, I don't know how to, there's so many things I want to say. So when we teach deep breathing at our certification, we'll see a lot of coaches cheating, if you will, by pushing out their abs. So one of the signs of deep diaphragmatic breathing is, pressurizing the lower torso and against the internal organs, and there's a rising of the stomach, and then to finish the breath, there's a rising of the chest. But like you said, many people are fighting that stillness, right? And they try to overcome it with hardness. And the hardness is using this gross motor output of forcing their abs out. Look, I'm diaphragmatic breathing. Like, is there a way that you teach it that allows people to easily understand how to get a full breath?
Yeah, wow. When you mess with people's breath, you are going right into their brainstem. So you're going right after primordial defensiveness and the ability to witness your breath. Actually, so here's the book. So this is Body by Breath. You guys got a copy, right?
Yep.
We sent you the book. There's many breathing practices. The very first breathing practice in the book is within, I think, the introduction, and it's called Witness Breath, which is just for you to be able to watch your breath like a lab scientist watching breath in the wild. Like, you are the wild, but you are also that scientist watching breath come in and out. You don't need to do anything interesting. You just want to watch it. Notice the volume that your body takes in, and notice the breath as it exits. Also notice if there's a gap before the next inhale starts, right? So just the observation of what is. And that is just that autonomic normal, right? That's what's happening automatically. The exercise is very complicated because you're trying to become aware of your awareness of breathing. And as soon as you start to try to become aware of your breathing, it gets very self-conscious and it wants to be controlled, or it can start to leap around like a wild stallion, and it gets very hard to control. So if I overwhelm it by, kind of muscling my way through it, I might be able to kind of fake it. But what's what you're saying, breath isn't a performance. But we can manipulate how we breathe, and we should manipulate how we breathe because it can really change the way our brain operates. We can literally change the type of loops, the thinking loops that we have because of the brain waves generated by respiration. There are unique brain waves that come from our breathing rhythm. And when we change our pace of breathing and our rate of breathing, we literally bathe our brain in new waves. And it tends to create a new network of harmony in our brain, the way our brain functions as a whole. So now let's get out of the head and into the body. How I teach people to gain biofeedback of their breathing. So breathing is two things. Breathing is a proprioceptive experience because you will feel tissues moving and bones moving, but it's also interoceptive because we're feeling this transient organ of air coming in and out of our body. And we might also feel our organs jostle, and that jostling of organs or the feeling of air, these are being perceived through the interoceptive pathway, the lateral thalamic tract of the spine, as well as the vagus nerve, also creating inputs. So we're all of a sudden needing to become aware of two tracts of awareness, proprioceptive and interoceptive. It's pretty overwhelming. And somebody who is already sympathetically like driven, it may just blow them out, and they just don't like breathing because it stresses them out. So there is this category of people when they're learning breathing, and I remember when I learned breathing, it stressed me out too. But we get this breath-induced anxiety, and somehow we have to help them overcome that breath-induced anxiety. How do we do that? Guess what? I got balls. Where's my gorgeous ball? So you know the gorgeous ball.
Yeah, I think mine's in here too. Pressure distracts the sensory motor aspects of your brain, and all of a sudden I have something else I can focus on. I can focus on the movement of the ball, or the feeling of the ball, or the displacement of my structure into the ball. And that gives me some biofeedback of the movements of breathing. And literally in doing that,
it can flip the switch and then bring you into a capacity to uptake proprioceptive as well as interoceptive inputs. And hopefully over time, it doesn't stress you out. It becomes very pleasurable, especially when you remove the ball and all of a sudden you just feel these spontaneous breaths filling into chambers of your torso that previously were stuck, stiff, painful, or non-moving, non-responsive to breath. I think a lot of people, like even the way you're describing it, you're like, oh, the belly and then the chest. Well, breathing happens your lungs aren't just here. Your lungs are all, they're packed, tons of lungs in my back, and my ribs move. And I have this tremendous amount of fascial tissue known as the thoracolumbar aponeurosis in my deep low back that is every layer of my core knitting into my low back. So breathing, when I'm doing like really good voluminous, what I call abdominal thoracic breaths or zone 1, zone 2 breaths, there should be an expansion of my pelvic floor, my waist, my low back, the circumference of the ribs, of course, the abdomen, the sternum will puff out. There's so much expansion happening all around, but our bodies are so unaware of the stiffness within so many of these myofascial layers, we don't even have a clue. And so our breathing, it's like what we can see in the mirror. Oh, my belly. Oh, my rib cage. Oh, my sternum, rather. So I try to bring people into the multidimensionality of their breathing. How do I do that? This is the best tool. I use 1 or 2 of the Coregeous balls in different arrangements all over the trunk. They're in a reclined position on the floor, or if laying on the ground is too much, they can lay on a bed, or they can do it in a chair. They can lean up against a wall. But this is really how I help them to map it. And just in the mapping of it, you're just all of a sudden you're out of pain. Your spine has been tractioned. You just got this incredible stretch in your psoas, your quadratus lumborum, that you didn't even know was stuck and stiff. And then all of a sudden you have slowed down your breathing pace. So your brain has shifted its brain patterns, and lo and behold, life is anew.
Yeah, that's the best way to explain it, is like you didn't even know it was tight. The Coregeous ball, every time I use it, I feel like I didn't realize my low back was in a vice until it's not. Your brain is pretty good at looking past it. And any good coach, we talk a lot about, a lot of our listeners are coaches, gym owners, and we at the CPPS talk about this too. But the best coaches don't use audible cues. It's some tactile feedback. If you tell a Gen Pop person that is coming to you for shoulder rehab to squeeze their lats or engage your lats or retract your shoulder blades, or you need better scapulothoracic, all those things just are garbage terms to the Gen Pop client. And in my experience, using the Coregeous ball for psoas and for the lower back, and it's so gentle too. We've tried a lot of the other psoas tools, and it, like you're saying, it's like, originally when we were talking about massage, it immediately causes people to just contract and
hold their breath
and grimace, and the Coregeous ball just takes all of that away. So it's a perfect tool. We've been using it for years.
Yeah.
So well, we want to be respectful of your time, Joe. You as always, you did a great job at explaining things at a scientific high level, but to meatheads like us, some knuckle draggers out there that are going to get a lot out of this. So thank you so much. Where should we send the listener? Is there a website that has all of your products? Or
yes, tuneupfitness.com has all of the products. It has programs like the one I mentioned with myself and Tom Myers. I've also recently released a program around HIIT with my friend who's a physical therapist, Doc Jennifer Brony, and I did a program called Roll Into HIIT that really takes you into the full resilience spectrum. So I teach the prehab and rehab. She teaches the HIIT. And we're trying to bring this work to people who have limits in their movement or have had fear of pushing their resiliency on either end of the spectrum, and try to bring that together in a program. But you can find all the therapy balls. You can find my online classroom. So I teach every week novel, interesting classes, everything from, I have a whole class just on the thumb.
Nice.
But then there's a class called breast and chest tune-up for folks who've had breast or chest surgeries and need scar tissue support. So it's a very, very comprehensive library. And I also, if people subscribe, we get online once a cycle, and I answer questions and whatnot. And then there's chances to study with me online. The role model, like I said, is about to launch online. I don't know when this is coming out, but it'll be early next year. And we have Body by Breath online. And but I do travel and teach events and conferences and that sort of thing. And then the only thing that's not available online is Body by Breath. It's not on my website because it's just too damn heavy. This book is over 3 pounds. So just get it on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, or what have you. We have the role model on my website, but you can go to Amazon and get that stuff there. And then find me on Instagram, like how we hang out, at the Jill Miller on Instagram.
Perfect. We'll post all of that in the show notes. But we can't thank you enough.
Thank you so much for leveling me up. And I love it too. I learned so much today.
Absolutely.
I can't wait to roll around with you guys again. I mean, that was
Are you talking jujitsu or because we're into jujitsu too? So
my son is really, really good at jujitsu, and I know
that's amazing.
He can basically kill me, and he's only 7 years old. So, I just have not. I have no skill there at all. I just start laughing because he's so cute and intense. But you can roll with him, and then I'll do this type of rolling with you. How's that?
Perfect.
Awesome.
That's all Smitty rolls with anyway, 7-year-olds. So
I'm going to beat one of them.
He's in the kids class. Yeah. He's getting there. We'll definitely link up to go. We got to get back to.
Absolutely.
On the East Coast, right?
Yeah. You're in Jersey, right?
I'm in Los Angeles.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
I thought you were in Jersey.
Yeah.
Okay.
No.
It's either like California or Jersey.
You're right. It's one or the other.
Right?
We're not far from. I'm in New York. Smitty's in PA. But,
okay, I will be on the East Coast in July. I'm going to be teaching. Tom Myers and I are going to teach an event. So there's 2 weekends that end July. The very final weekend of July, I'm going to be teaching at a place in the Berkshires called Cropalo Institute, and then the weekend prior to that, I'll be with Tom at his institute in Maine, on the coast of Maine.
Yeah,
and we'll be doing
a
program together. So maybe you guys can get up there. That would be so much fun. You would love.
We're there. Count us in.
Thank you so much.
He's like the fascia oracle.
Yeah, absolutely.
Amazing.
Awesome.
Jill, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you guys.
Seriously appreciate it. We had a great time. Thanks so much.